And finally, we're going to talk about Jose Aldo and Max Holloway, the rematch between the two. Some people say that they don't want to see this fight because they already saw it, and because it was it looked like a beating from an outside angle that Aldo took, and because it's an immediate rematch, people seem like they don't want to see the same movie again. But what if it's a good movie? What if it's Jaws? I mean, their last fight was an interesting one. There were a lot of adjustments going on, and it was exciting. And I think that the second fight will be as exciting as their first one. So let's talk about Max Holloway, the champion. He came into the UFC after having just a couple of fights. Holloway went from a young, exciting fighter to a smart, collected one. And back in the day, he used to throw in a random spinning back kick or a flying knee that didn't make much sense, and then he would get that countered, and that was kind of a bad in-fight decision making. An example of a bad in-fight decision making might be a guy that gets taken down and, let's say, from a double leg. So his opponent tries to take him down, tries to double leg him, and he goes for a guillotine. But it fails. His opponent slips out of the choke, and let's say that happens 5 more times. Obviously, that's not going to work out because it hasn't worked out a couple of the first times this guy tried it. So that would be a bad in-fight decision making. Pulling guard is another one. I mean, if you're not Brian Tissidi Ortega or Fabricio Verdum or even Damian Maia, then you probably should not pull guard. I mean, Damian Maia pulls half guard so that he can sweep you, so that's still a good idea, but if you're none of those guys, you probably should not do it. Actually, Faris Zahabi has a YouTube channel. It's a TriStar Gym YouTube channel, and he has a couple of videos on pulling spider guard, which is kind of when you have an armbar position. So it's kind of like a flying armbar, but you are in an advantageous position, so you can still remain top position or try for a submission. So you can check those videos out there on YouTube, and that would be a good idea. Another example that we've actually talked about is Francis Ngannou. When he saw that hook uppercut combination work, he did it 3 other times. And now Holloway is a way more collected fighter. He doesn't make silly decisions. Everything is thought out. He's a thinking fighter. He makes very good decisions. And he does his best work on the feet, where he can do pretty much everything. He's like a jack of all trades. He can pressure, backing his opponents up towards the cage and then hitting them with a nasty combination. That's what he did to Ricardo Lamas. Even with that last 10 seconds in the fight, when he pointed to the ground and bait Lamas into an exchange, he was still moving his head very well. He didn't get hit clean. He can stick and move at a distance, throwing 1 or 2 strikes at a time. He can decide to stay in the pocket and counter, which was what he did to Aldo. He counters in combinations and in layers, which is very, very pleasing to see. He moves his head well and has some good footwork. It doesn't seem like it seems like he doesn't have a preferred way of fighting. He fights his opponents the way you need to fight them, and he's very adaptable. So let's say if you see a fighter like Rafael dos Anjos, who's a pressure fighter, you can basically expect him to pressure and get in his opponent's face pretty much every fight he fights. A fighter like Holly Holm, who's an outside fighter, you can expect her to be on the outside. She's not going to pressure you. So those fighters are sticking to their style and sticking to their game plan. Holloway, on the other hand, fights in a very adaptable way. He can change his game plan even during the fight, something you can see in boxing. And you can see it in boxing because Well, it's kind of easier to do that there because you have 12 rounds, so you can afford to lose some of them. You don't see it that often in MMA. Holloway can pressure one round and play an outside game the other round and then go back to pressuring again. So he's very, very adaptable and very versatile. One of the strongest suits of his game, of his style, is the pace, the amount of strikes he throws. He lands something like 7 significant strikes a minute, and I think that the pace will play a very important role in this fight as well as it played in their first fight. And we're going to talk about that when we get to the matchup. So let's switch gears and talk about Jose Aldo. Oh man, Jose Aldo. One of my favorite fighters. And here's an interesting thing. I don't know if the fans that came along with Conor McGregor have followed Jose Aldo's career because it's a very impressive one and people might not care about that and the fact that he was undefeated for over 10 years. They care that Conor beat the guy who was undefeated for 10 years. So if you think that Aldo isn't a good fighter, you are mistaken because he is a very good fighter. In those 10 years, he ran through fighters in WEC and became a champion there. He was very aggressive and vicious with his leg kicks, one of the best you can see. Then when he came over to the UFC and became the very first featherweight champion, he started to fight more reserved. He became more of a boxer and then a counterpuncher. His footwork is one of the best in the world. He's very efficient with it. He doesn't take 3 steps if he doesn't have to. He'll take 2 and then circle out. His style is based on the pace he wants to keep throughout the fight, which is the amount of strikes he throws, which is something like 3.3 significant strikes landed per minute. He's capable of doing that by collecting data his opponents give him and outthinking his opponents. He reads what his opponents do and then counters that, making them think about their next move. And when you do that, when you start thinking, when you're fighting Jose Aldo, the fight is basically over. Aldo has figured you out and he's going to pick you apart. He's going to fight his fight at his pace, at his distance, and basically he'll be in control of the whole fight. Let's talk about what happened when they fought last time. Aldo took a beating, probably the worst of his career. He got knocked out in 13 seconds by Conor McGregor, but it wasn't really a fight. Not a lot happened, but in this fight he got figured out and he got beat up. I mean, the beating that he took on the floor when he got knocked down was not easy to watch, you know. So let's talk about what happened before that. Holloway fought Aldo in an interesting way. He tried getting in Aldo's face. He tried feinting Aldo and trying to draw his counters out. He tried putting combinations together, and all of that led to Aldo countering Holloway's attacks. And here's where the adaptability of Holloway comes in. He figured that there's no way that he cannot get countered by Aldo. So what he did is counter the counter of Aldo. When Aldo would counter Holloway, he would not stop at that moment. He figured out that he has to keep going. And in the third round, he turned up the pace. He did a good job of fighting his fight at his pace, exchanging with Aldo for more than 2 layers. And then the finish came. It was all over. Holloway was crowned a new champ. And just like in their first fight, in the rematch, the most important thing will be the pace. Basically, the amount of strikes thrown. Because Holloway is a high volume striker and Aldo really isn't. What Aldo wants to do is to control the pace of the fight and the output of his opponents. He does it with good counters. He does it by outthinking his opponents, countering their attacks until they run out of ideas and have nothing left. He does it with his jab and his tight footwork to set the distance that he wants to fight at. Counters are also a good weapon. He uses that to scare his opponents from getting in his face, because when you get countered, you're like, oh shit, I better not do that again. And in their first fight, Holloway figured how to get around that. Well, actually, how to get through that, because he had to walk through Aldo's counters and make the exchanges longer so that he can penetrate Aldo's defense. And it took him like a round and a half to figure that out. At the end of the second round, he still got hit pretty well with some good punches by Aldo. In the third round, he turned up the pace, he turned up the volume, and finished the long-reigning champ. He made Aldo fight at his pace, at the pace that he cannot keep up. So that's basically how it looked like. And so let's talk about their second meaning. Let's talk about this fight. Let's talk about the future. And again, just like in their first fight, in the rematch, keep an eye on the pace. How many strikes Holloway throws and how many strikes Aldo throws. So what Holloway has to do to win this fight is to basically do what he did in their first fight, put the pace on Aldo, because I don't think that Aldo can fight at Holloway's pace. Holloway will still get countered, though. He will still get hit by Aldo, but just like in their first fight, Holloway will have to take them and throw first and last. What it means is that he will have to, well, he will definitely throw more volume, so he will lead, and by doing that, he will draw out the counter of Aldo, and then he'll have to counter that counter. That's kind of how the finishing sequence on the feet looked in their first fight. Holloway throws 1-2, and just Aldo thinks that he's safe. And then Holloway follows up with another 1-2 and drops him. So I think that's what he'll have to do, again, to win this fight. So let's talk about how Aldo would have to adjust to win this fight. He said before this fight that he will be more aggressive, and I think that's one of the adjustments that he can make, and that's one of the adjustments that I think might work, because he has to stop Holloway from throwing that volume at him. Somehow, he has to limit his output, and I think that being more aggressive might help him in scaring Holloway off. I say might because I don't know if it will work. Holloway can take a punch and he's not afraid to lose exchanges, so you can expect or you can keep an eye on the fact that Aldo will probably again will win the first round. What Aldo would have to do is to tap into the vintage WEC Aldo. If he's going to scare Holloway off, he has to move forward. And he became more of a boxer these days, but I think leg kicks would be a very good idea. He didn't throw a lot of leg kicks in their first fight, and I think his coach said that Aldo was injured or something like that. I'm not sure if that was the case, but when he threw one of the first leg kicks, he got countered, and after that he didn't throw much leg kicks after that. I wouldn't be surprised if Aldo goes for takedowns just to change the pace of the fight. Holloway has a good takedown defense, but I don't think it would be a good idea to try. And if that fails, Aldo would have to really think about how many takedowns he wants to attempt, to not waste his gas tank on just takedowns that might not do a lot of good for him. Let's talk about the prediction. I see this fight going two ways. If Aldo taps into the vintage WEC Aldo and moves forward and puts together nice punch-kick combinations, he can win this fight. But if he doesn't, or if Holloway doesn't allow him to do that, I think Holloway will do something similar he did the first time around. Because both men are very adjustable, this fight will be something like a question and answer exchange. The man who lacks the answer to the other man's questions will probably be defeated. I'm hesitant to choose the winner here because I really do like both of them. And I mean, I guess I'll go with Holloway because of the fact that he was able to adjust better in their first fight. But hey, anything can happen. Aldo can win, and I wouldn't be that much surprised because Aldo did prove himself as a champion for so many years, and the fact that Holloway just figured him out, that kind of makes me pick him. I predict fourth or fifth round TKO because I think that Aldo will kind of learn his lessons from the first fight, and this might look a little bit more competitive. Nonetheless, I think that this will be a good fight. Stay tuned because I'm probably going to do a recap of what happened at UFC 218. That might come out Monday or Tuesday. Just talking about the things that happened, breaking down how this fighter defeated the other fighter, and basically recapping the whole event. So stay tuned for that, and thank you so much for listening.